You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khatib. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Neurosurgery is an exciting field. All the fields of medicine are exciting, but let's face it, the areas of the brain, neuroscience is kind of this sort of undiscovered realm, you know, and I think with a lot of attention being put on it from people like Elon Musk, considering that also all the stuff with the AI coming out, the brain is sort of this new forefront of technology. We're joined today by Jesse Christopher, who is the CEO and co-founder of Longevity Neurosolutions. I'm going to encourage our audience to go check out their website. So one of the things that I love about medical devices specifically is that compared to biotech and pharma, like these are physical devices, like you can see the results with your eyes, and some of the videos that I've seen about what longevity does, especially on YouTube, is really mind-blowing. So for those who are clinicians or investors, go to Longevity, spelled LONGEVITI, not ITY, ITI.com. You can see more. Jesse, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy New Year. Thanks for having me, Omar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And shout out to our mutual friend, Tim Scandal, who made the connection. Tim, thank you so much for getting Jesse on the show. So Jesse, before we jump into the science of the company, maybe give us a few minutes, a little bit of your background, especially I know for our audience, we have a huge Stryker contingency. And so they're going to love your story. So give us a little bit of your background. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into our industry? And how did you end up becoming the CEO of this company?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief and relevant. So, you know, born in Texas or raised in Texas, grew up on the East Coast, exposed to a lot, you know, really looking for my path like most people. Found myself after college looking at in pharmaceutical sales. Nothing against pharmaceutical sales, but like you said, there's a tangibility to med sales that is really intrinsically satisfying. So, you know, made that transition about 20 years ago, and shout out to Todd Johnson, who hired me at Stryker and fundamentally changed my life. So
that's a legendary name out of Stryker, by the way.
He is. So, you know, there's a lot of tradition within companies like Stryker, Medtronic, and others. We've got these rich, you know, sales forces and kind of coaching trees like the NFL, and you know, we're no exception. So a lot of longevity is composed of some of the familiar faces that, you know, both made our division at Stryker excellent, as well as others. But you know, at the end of the day, what made me kind of make the leap from Stryker, you know, I loved the company, still do, and really loved my position. But you know, recognize that not every company can do everything. And while I'd seen 1,000 cases and I was, you know, training reps and we were, you know, hitting our numbers and it was a lot of fun, over time I realized there needed to be more. We needed to innovate more. And as I became a parent of 3 daughters and a husband of a wonderful wife, I was hit between the eyes with the statistics that 1 in 5 of us will have a neurological disorder over 65. We fully intend to live over 65. And I realized that, you know, we weren't innovating fast enough to address some of these neurological problems coming at us so quickly. And here I was in a unique situation in my career. I could keep going the route that was pretty safe and still rewarding. But then I would run this risk of this Greek tragedy, being rich off of company stock, but, you know, having an affliction either myself or with one of my loved ones that I know that in hindsight, maybe we could have done something about. And that really haunted me. And that ultimately made me quit my job that I love, cold turkey. And for anybody out there in medtech, you know, they pay well, especially, you know, Stryker and other companies. To take, you know, a family and a mortgage and everything else and kind of put it on the line was a crucible moment for myself, but it had to be done. And, you know, in hindsight, it might look really easy, but that was really a moment for me. That's what drove me to start Longevity. And I left on great terms from Stryker and maintained friendships with, you know, not everybody that I worked with to date.
I want to just point something out, by the way. If you know, I just want to, just before we depart from this, you know, I do want to say that that's very admirable because, you know, for myself, I'm a startup guy. And so for somebody from the startup world, once you do many of them, for you to go and start your own, like you're kind of used to a lot of the, you know, the stress, anxiety, you know, a lot of things that come with it, you just get used to it. But for you, I mean, you were at Stryker for a decade. And, just looking at your LinkedIn, and you left in 2016. So this is right when Stryker really rallied. The Mako acquisition was starting to pay off, which shout out to Kevin Lobo. That was such an amazing thing. A lot of things started happening well for Stryker coming out of 2010. I think was a tough time. And so 2016, these were like the hockey stick moments of Stryker, and you're at a manager level. So like, considering that you had a family, you had a life, like you had a very easy, not easy, but comfortable setup. And for you to say, hey, honey, we're going to throw all that away and we're going to go into the startup world. And it's not like you went from Stryker to, let's say, an orthopedic implant company. You're going to something completely different. So I really want to point that out in terms of how admirable that is as an entrepreneur. And I mean, look, shout out to your family and your wife for being so supportive. Yeah.
Yeah, to Megan Christopher out there, for my daughters who says she can't be Googled.
Yeah, so single most important decision of your life is who you pick as a spouse. It's I wouldn't have started my business if it wasn't for my wife.
You nailed it. And again, a lot of things have to come together for us to be in hindsight talking about it. But it was a moment where you never know. I experienced every emotion you can imagine. You described a lot of them, but you went from security to complete unknown. And the way I told everyone is, look, I've got enough Stryker stock that I can live off for maybe a year and a half. I'll probably be coming back to Stryker as an ASR. Will you hire me in 18 months? And then my wife would come home and she'd see cans of methyl methacrylate in our garage and signs that say, "Don't go in the kitchen for 8 hours." At the time, Breaking Bad was really successful. She's like, "What is my husband really doing here?" But lo and behold, I was making prototypes, completing circuits in my garage with my kids' toys, taking them apart, mimicking machine-brain interface wattage and outputs so that I could hermetically seal them into what is now products that longevity makes.
So can we spend, again, I want to make sure that we jump to the products and the science. How the hell did you, as a sales guy, not only quit your job, but you're like, hey, I'm going to start like manufacturing some of these things in my house, right? It's not like you had a training in this or anything. So like how, like, can you spend a minute explaining how the hell you started doing that?
Yeah, no, it's the most common.
To me, that was very remarkable.
It's the most common question I get. In fact, I'm humble. I can't do it all, but I have been underestimated from time to time because of my sales background. And I think for all your listeners out there, I don't want anybody to underestimate the power of seeing thousands of cases themselves. You got a lot of reps out there. They don't realize that their Rolodex, their experience, what they've seen, and the real lifedness of what they're doing is extremely valuable. And I realized when I quit Stryker and I went through the first boot camp, and it was me and 99 physicians. We're all pitching concepts, getting browbeat by the mentors, and I was going the traditional route. And I realized that the thing that we had, or I had at least, was practical working knowledge of how everything had to go to be successful. There's a million ideas out there that are great. Very few of those would make a successful company. And I think that's the rate limiter that I learned from Stryker, combined with, just an innate curiosity. As at Stryker, I was always the one who was taking our physicians, in to see how things were made, the knees, the hips, where I was going to all the conferences, learning, what's the cutting edge. And I couldn't get enough of it. And you said it at the top, why I chose neuro is because it's still exciting. The little kid in me still thinks I want to be an astronaut or go to the bottom of the seas. Well, those in our brain are the last little 3 event horizons, that are at least achievable right now in our shared generations. And it's exciting to me that our overlapping generations right now will be the one in the stream of history of humanity, the hair sliver of time when we decoded an unmapped brain. I think that's fascinating to me. The information that we're gonna be learning off of from this generation is infinite. It still gets me out of bed every day. But how do you make it practical, right? Because everybody can talk about it, who can be about it. And that's where my skill sets that I learned at Stryker and the culture of a Stryker sales culture really came into play when I had to finance, fundraise, and put a team together through COVID and everything else you can imagine.
That's amazing. And so departing that, I know that, around 2016, 2017, you essentially developed some relationship with Johns Hopkins. I actually did research. So it's one of the top, if not the top, medical research institute in the world to develop these essentially low profile intracranial, this intracranial platform. To tell us a little bit more about that, and then you give me the cue in to pull up some of the images.
Oh yeah, so the real important story here is, I was at Stryker, and like other companies, we were selling prosthetics that could reconstruct the skull. let's get away from the face because that's a whole nother ball of wax. For the brain, there's not much to do up there historically. You either remove a piece of bone and put it back, or you put a piece of titanium or a cement, something to protect the brain. These devices aren't inexpensive. And it dawned on me in the Internet of Things age, I could buy a cell phone 1 millimeter or 5 millimeter thick, and that was the same thickness of the skull. I was selling a piece of plastic for $20,000 to reconstruct the skull, yet I could buy a phone for $1,000 that had more processing power than the space shuttle. Somebody's going to close this gap. So it dawned on me that we needed to start working on platforms that allowed us to leave function behind. If this is the most important day of that patient's life, let's make it the only time they need surgery. So what are all the reasons that we're likely to go back in for surgery? And let's start with those as functions. And the output is, let's create a platform, an implantable platform that can help enable other devices, functions, etc. And so the core concept of longevity was, if and when you need neurosurgery and you need to remove a piece of your bone for some reason, let's be deliberate about how we reconstruct it afterwards. Are you going to put a piece of bone back that does nothing and maybe has some risk of infection or not? Or are you going to put some device in there that also might have some risk of infection, but also offer you some sort of function? And where are the lines where that's worth it for whatever patient? There's a lot of questions on the decision tree. Where we were focusing on longevity is form and function, form and power. The original concept of longevity, and still, one of our buckets is, we provide the platform, and we can provide communications wirelessly, and we can charge devices. And we're agnostic on the function. We've worked with many, if not most, of the companies you could possibly name, both confidentially and not, on devices that are either out to market or not, or never see the light of day. And so that in itself is the first platform that longevity was offering, is function within this cranioplasty. And so it evolved, interestingly enough. We thought we would have to go a PMA route and plant batteries and electrodes. And on our website, under Vision, I think you can kind of see some of the early renditions of this. And this really piqued a lot of interest from around the world. And you can imagine the collaborations that spawned off of that. What's interesting, though, why? Why are we going to put something like this in somebody's head with all the technology we can think of, with all the batteries? It's because it's going to serve some function. And this is where, we had a real, I'd say come to Jesus moment for ourselves. I'm not very religious, but it was a crucial moment for the company. We were coming through COVID, and we recognized that, the funding markets were changing. There was less investment in value on promise as much as EBITDA. And so how are we as a young company going to respond, at the same time recognizing the function that we were going to implant may be cannibalized by this other platform that we were introducing to the market? And this is where I'll pivot and add, this other function platform turned out to be our ability to enable ultrasound in meaningful ways. And so we have both the implantable platform where we can house electrodes, grids, batteries. And then we also have our base platform that looks like a window. So quite literally, you remove a piece of bone, however big or small, replace it with one of our ClearFit windows. And then we can give you a transducer that fits in your pocket. And on day one, you can start looking at a brain like a CT scanner anywhere, anytime, and it's real-time video. So we realized that the first function we were going to be offering now was real-time diagnostics. And so as a company, we launched the ClearFit platform a few years ago in the middle of COVID, when CT scanners had lines, around the floor for people to get their lungs CT'd. Some of our early adopters were learning, hey, it's pretty easy to do rounds with ultrasound. And frankly, it's probably better economics to bring imaging to bedside than beds into the imaging room. We have a diagnostic slide on a deck that I sent you that shows, so let me just pivot, take a step back. If it's not clear, we started this company to introduce function and the implantable platform. We still can and do a lot of that. We are really promoting right now the secondary platform, which is this information platform. And at the end of the day, that's the key to all neuro. Neuro disorders cost the United States over $1 trillion every year. 1.7 trillion to the United States and Europe combined. Why is that? Because we're talking about the most complex organ to humanity and the most inaccessible one. So that's why Elon Musk is invested, is because he understands probably better than anybody. At the end of the day, we're talking about ones and zeros. He's gone from PayPal to Tesla to space and now to the source at Neuralink. He sees what we see. If you can be at the front gate of the water source or the information source, you can control a lot that goes downstream. Ask people in California. So, that's where we are in the information chain. We want to be at the first step, right after the brain emits something, to capture that and then help process that in meaningful ways. So for us, an ultrasound. Sorry, go ahead.
And so I was gonna say, and so essentially, the vision of your company kind of feels like it's giving like pun intended, like an actual window into the brain, to make it a lot more accessible. And I think that's one of the key points of innovation that people are forgetting about it when it comes to medicine. I think that's the one thing we got out of COVID is like, you can have all this great technology and everything, but whether it's for the patient or actually for the clinician, access is everything. So if you don't have great access, doesn't matter how great the technology is, like you're not going to be able to make as much of a meaningful impact on the patient as you could.
You nailed it. And what we're trying to say is, look, we need to get out of this one company, one product's going to solve it all. It's going to take a combination of companies, teams, and products to move ourselves forward with this neuro initiative. So, we're humble and hungry and hardworking. We know we're not likely to take over a Stryker or Medtronic or anybody anytime soon, if ever. We're more focused on how can we make meaningful steps forward for all of us and create a rising tide effect, even for the biggest players out there. And so far, it's been remarkable what other companies, institutions, physicians, and patients have seen through our windows. And so the ClearFit technology starts by looking like a diagnostic tool. You're like, okay, great. I can take $1,000, Clarius handheld transducer from my pocket and look at Omar's brain on my cell phone anywhere. We could be in Central Park right now and do the wireless, and it's full video.
And the key is because of that clear. And by the way, let me bring up for the audience who's watching some images of the actual product so they can see what this looks like. But
Yeah,
I think
think about the bone as being somewhat it is porous, and so it does not allow easily ultrasound through it. So attenuation is a real big factor. You have some low frequencies that get through the bone, and so you've got companies like Insight out there that are doing some great things with focused ultrasound. Those also require significant purchases of multi-million-dollar machines, and there's a whole economy there. What's interesting here is that we can at least offer some of the initial benefits of the diagnostics to anybody. So a private practice that puts one of these into the OR, empowered with a $1,000 transducer in their pocket with Longevity app, can now patients can visit their practice and they can run early diagnostics. Our physician counterparts out in the market and in the world are actually running the standards and protocols for us. As a company, we're not telling people how to do it. It's Johns Hopkins or USC or Lenox or Northwell or NYU or Baylor, and they're all looking at various things, whether it's what can we see and what can we say we can see, or what can we not see, what can we bill for, where does this go? And all of those are really exciting because right now there doesn't seem to be a rate limiter on the positive outcomes. On the positive benefits of enabling anytime visibility in real time. So not only can you see the brain, frankly, anywhere you want without an MRI or a CT, but you can see it in motion. And so NYU is showing us bypasses that are failing 3 months before they would typically have a CTA. Or at Hoag, they're seeing patients coming back and picking up some tumor regrowth before they would typically have their CT or MRI. And again, this is early, so I got to be very careful. As a company, we are. We're not saying that you can definitively see any one thing, but when you see the videos that are being put out online, it's a common misnomer that they're being misinterpreted as CT or some other imaging modality.
And your thing is that if a patient has a clinical indication or pathological condition where essentially they need essentially one of these clear intracranial implants, right? Then they're able to go essentially from this, which is when you're trying to, get some information on the brain, you have a lot of equipment, right?
Can I interrupt and walk you through this? Because this is
please. Yeah. Please walk me through this.
First of all, credit to Dr. Nathaniel Ben Salom out of Lenox Hill for donating the picture you see in the middle. It's messy, but that's a patient. So it looks like a space shuttle with the cover taken off. That's a patient with, on average, 13 connections connecting them to their bed and apparatus. You can see, I think, their toe. So, early on when we were asking some of our neurosurgeons, hey, is this beneficial to see the brain? most of them said, yes, this would be great. Can you train our staff? On occasion, you might have a neurosurgeon say, look, I'll just snap my fingers and I get a CT scan. It's just not like that. You got to take that patient with those 13 connections, disconnect them, put them on another bed, get 2 to 3 nurses or healthcare practitioners to escort that patient with their connections in this new bed down to the hall, down the elevator, into the radiology suite, disconnect them again, put them on yet another bed. Once they're on that bed, often they'll have to sedate these patients because they are some have neurological disorders. They then put them in a tube and radiate them for 30 to 45 minutes. The output is that still image you see right there, that grainy black and white still image. Then they take that patient out of the bed, often still sedated. They put them back on that other bed, the mobile bed. Then they reconnect all their mobile connections. Then they bring them back up into the ICU, and then they put them back onto another bed and finalize their connections. That workflow costs a ton of money, and it's a mouthful just to say. So
Yeah. And not to mention the I was going to say something that I don't feel like there have been enough studies done on this, but when it comes to like the ability to heal and again recover, that's a lot of stress on the body, to be going through all of that,
Good point. A lot of patients, and we're learning a lot too, have tube phobia. Having had MRIs myself, it's not pleasant. And so, the issue is ultrasound right now isn't going to solve everything. You cannot see everything the same way with all different frequencies. But most of the time for that workflow I just described, I think 96% of the time it's inactionable. There's nothing to do with that patient. Often they're, trying to confirm what they know. Sometimes there's an issue with the patient. Maybe they have a headache and they need to get a scan. So you do this, and now some of our hospitals are saying, well, maybe we can replace some of these CT scans. It's not uncommon for one patient to have a dozen CT scans in a visit. What does that mean for a hospital system or a physician or a patient, to your point, that maybe we can mitigate that from 12 down to 3 and the rest are bedside ultrasounds? That's a game changer for that patient's experience. I've been there in the morning doing rounds. Typically they start at 4:30. These patients don't want to be waking up and taken down to radiology to do no image. Some of the hospitals now that have been adopting the bedside imaging, it's just a completely different experience. So, and I think I gave you an image. There's a patient where you can see post-operatively, they just have a tiny transducer on their head and they're looking at an iPad of their brain. And that image that they're looking at in 11 seconds of this time out in California early on, this physician, this neurosurgeon, had no ultrasound training whatsoever, but within 11 seconds had oriented himself and looked at the exact image he was trying to get through a CT, like the one you're showing right there. He could see the ventricles, that very familiar butterfly shape. He could measure them to the millimeter. He could see the tumor cavity, and he could point all of this out to the patient in real time. And so one of the audio clips from it is great. She said, "Oh, this is so much better than getting a CT scan and being radiated." Now, this is a patient who had 3 tumor removals, and it was the first time having this experience. It's very rare in our space that we can touch the patient in a way and like that, in a meaningful way, and that quickly. And so we're all kind of pinching ourselves on a daily basis, making sure that 1, we don't overpromise. It's not going to solve everything. But 2, every CT scan we save is a big deal. And to your earlier point, there's a lot of logistical cost and risk that goes into the hospital patient transport. NIH showed that of a study of adverse events, there's multiple studies, be careful here, 26% of adverse events happen during patient transport. Don't reverse that. That doesn't mean that 26% of the time you move a patient around, you're going to have an adverse event. It means when they looked at all the adverse events, 26% of those happened to happen when they were being transported.
Which is a lot.
It is a lot. And on top of that, The average adverse event costs $8,000. It's not always life-threatening. But when you hear that workflow, moving a patient around with all the connections, it only takes one misconnection or one,
What's considered like an adverse event?
Maybe somebody touched something and had to replace something. Maybe they had an event while transporting the patient that required them to rush back to the ICU. Maybe they needed to be stabilized. Maybe they left without something that they needed. And the NIH does a great job of kind of categorizing these. But as we get into healthcare and look at how do we replace these never events, this is an easy opportunity for us. And so don't take my word for it. Take the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was a public hearing which discussed exactly this. Said, look, this is a new technology, ultrasounding at bedside. It's so new that we don't have all the answers, but the answers that are coming are pretty obvious. And so let's at least enhance this, because the economics, if we can start moving imaging to patients versus patients to imaging, are profound, like really dipping into that $1 trillion impact I mentioned at the top. As we calculate, there's billions spent on imaging alone that we could probably impact here. There's some interesting models on it. Time will tell how big of an impact it's made, but I think you and I see the same thing. Information is driving most innovation, and I've never seen the speed of information lose to something traditional. So as long as we're responsible with this information, I think real-time imaging anywhere post-operatively is probably something not only us, but others are going to keep building on.
And just, I want to flash to it real quick and come back to you, but just for those who are watching and not so familiar. So you saw that essentially, I want to just go as an example. So again, all the wiring, all the transportation, plus the amount of costs that come along with getting a CT scan or if it needed an MRI, to allowing the patient to stay where they are and then using ultrasound to get access to information from the brain, mainly because of the product that Longevity has, which gives them essentially a window into the brain. Is that the best way to characterize it?
You nailed it.
Okay. So for the, I think that covers the clinical side. I want to talk a little bit on the investment side, because there's a lot of investors who are interested in this space. So if you are essentially enabling a platform where you have a new implant that's more cost effective, right, gives you a window into the brain, have you guys considered coming up with your own proprietary technology for imaging or capturing some of that information beyond just the implant?
We have.
Okay.
And that's an exercise that we probably run annually for the last few years. We're very satisfied with our partnerships at the moment with GE and with Clarius. But and on top of that, we've got a pretty strong position with intellectual property around the ability to ultrasound through a cranioplasty. There's a spectrum of frequencies that we've been able to obtain, and we're pretty proud of that. On top of that, as a young company, we're trying to make it easier to work with us than to work against us, and this is a pretty heavy lift. There are some ways that we could probably own more and increase profitability, but right now growth is probably the main value driver. So the more accessible we can make this market for others, we see that rising tide helping us as well. But around the corner, if you're talking about investors, we don't want to give everything away. I mean, we partnered with Clarius for a dedicated app. It's the first bedside neuro ultrasound app ever. And so now we're going to see, how the market responds to that. How does the market like being able to see a patient's brain in North Dakota? It's any practice that, had surgery within 1,000 miles. Or a hospital system like a Johns Hopkins that, hits a critical mass and the ICU is changing protocols, or like a Northwell. These are questions that we're answering, but if they pan out the way that it looks, we see a lot of standardization. So that helps our investors say, okay, look, the core pickaxe here for all the miners out there is in good hands. This company knows what they're doing. They know how to make these pickaxes well with high quality. There's a but though, or an and. I mean, the exciting thing is right now we're just talking about diagnostics. We're talking about the core business today is a window. You can see the brain and all the economics that happen and the patient benefits. What we're realizing, or as a society, is that ultrasound is so much more dynamic than those of us who are parents, ever probably considered. You can ratchet up and down the frequency of ultrasound and change it from an imaging modality to something totally unique. So if you ratchet it down, I mentioned you can disrupt the blood-brain barrier. There's some really interesting things going on with that. I won't touch too much on that, but you can imagine a world where maybe not everyone can receive, focused ultrasound, but, we could empower a country by just getting a little window implant, and then maybe a less expensive unit in a clinic can offer you over time the same therapy. Much more economical, same therapy, and blood-brain barrier disruption, for example, is one of the many therapies that are very promising for a lot of reasons for neuro. So let's get back to that spectrum of frequencies for ultrasound. So that's a low end. You can burn, you can ablate, you can really do some interesting things. You ratchet it all the way up past imaging to the highest frequencies, and you can get the best resolution we've ever had of the brain. So at last I've seen, we can get 5 to 10 times the resolution as functional MRI with ultra-fast functional ultrasound. And so, probably notably, Charles Liu at USC just made the cover of Science using one of our implants. Because what this means is that you can use ultra-fast functional ultrasound wirelessly through one of our implants and now see better resolution of brain activity in real time than maybe you have been able to. Most importantly, these patients are now mobile; they can move around. So, Charles Liu famously, amongst a couple of patients, was mapping a patient's brain while he is rehabbing, playing guitar. Up until that point, almost all of these studies have had a tether coming out of the patient. So now you're seeing ultra-fast functional ultrasound becoming this 4K of TV or imaging or maybe BCI, and that's where we're really excited too. We're not eliminating the need for a procedure, but maybe we can cut the wire.
Got it.
From an investor standpoint, there's a lot of meat today and a lot of promise for tomorrow.
So what I like about the model, at least the business. So you guys, are you through? Where are you in your regulatory pathway? Are you through FDA and you guys are commercial?
Yeah, we're commercial. I'd say there's probably around 4,000 patients enabled in the United States, and maybe another few hundred worldwide.
What I like about, and you correct me, because but when I look at it from an investor standpoint, what I like about what you have is what you often see is a capital equipment tech company, right? And then which is already expensive. It is very difficult. I mean, look, I love robotics, but there's a reason why, like, if you have a robotics company, like, you're raising $400 to $500 million at minimum. Like, it's just, like, it's just assumed. And then when they get to a certain level of commercial success, then they kind of say, like, okay, like, let's start introducing some implants, which is like a whole different thing, right? The problem with that model is that, like, it's very it's capital inefficient, because you're trying to sell these pieces of capital versus what you have an implant, which is a lot easier of a purchase for hospitals. So you're able to get some, like, good revenue going, and then because it's an implant that's an access point, you can spend time and to use some of the investments that you're getting to develop different tools for diagnostics, whether it's like in the hospital or, again, I don't know what you guys' plans are, but I think about the future about, like, at-home care and remote monitoring.
So the FDA around the corner from where I'm sitting has just built the first at-home model for at-home telehealth. I sit on the Life Science Advisory Board for Governor, was Hogan, now Moore, both great. And one of the interesting things is, our proximity is going to allow us to test this out. What does it look like when you've got a normal pressure hydrocephalus patient sitting at home that needs to upload an image of his or her brain or video to their physician? Can they do it? Is it as simple as an app? And you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, this world is coming at us fast, and so let's fit into it rather than ask it all to conform to us. And that's where longevity is. We try to play agnostic, like Switzerland. We're really not picking fights. We're too small to do that. We've got a really cool base innovation, and we've got a lot more under the hood. Let's collaborate and help patients in the process. A point I didn't mention why I brought up the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, because, look, if it's not economically viable, take everything I just said and throw it out the window. What they thought was it was so economically viable that they gave a dedicated code specifically to the longevity ClearFit, which I haven't seen. Of course, I'm not looking through code books, but if you look through the ICD-10 PCS code book, there's now a dedicated code for this. So if physicians want to use a ClearFit for a patient with hydrocephalus or tumor, they can now have the hospital reimburse for the cost of that without adding to the cost of healthcare. This is the government, the biggest payer, investing in innovation, which is encouraging to see behind the scenes.
Yeah, and by the way, if I wanted to bring this up because I thought these looks like I left it out. All right, hold on. I'm going to pull up. You sent me a really interesting slide on a study. I want to just pull that up for the audience to look at, and if you can have to talk us through, because I thought the results were quite remarkable. But let me pull that up real quick.
While you're doing that, I'd encourage anybody who wants to learn more to go to our publications and news page.
Oh yeah, you have a great publications and news page on your website. It's like there's a lot there.
Man, I worked for Stryker forever. I wish we had more publications. When you're that successful, I guess you don't need it. But we pride ourselves on being investigator driven. So longevity doesn't drive this innovation, although we might help and fund some of it. This has been all investigator driven, and the outcomes have been remarkable.
Yeah.
This is the one on the left. Is this what you're talking about? This was the cover of Operative Neurosurgery or Neurosurgery Red last year. And so Johns Hopkins, for any innovation that's meaningful, you got to answer some base questions. What are we changing before we change it? Can we? And so Johns Hopkins was looking at the most common procedure you have for an open neurosurgery is hydrocephalus. It's a pressure issue. Anybody can get it tomorrow. You can be born with it. More kids are born with it every year than diabetes and Downs. It's not discussed that much. When you go into a neuropractice, all too often, this is kind of the new guy or girl, task is to take care of the hydrocephalus cases that come and go. Very few places specialize in it. And, the underlying factors, it doesn't pay very well. I have friends that are physicians that, pull wisdom teeth. They get paid 3 times more to pull wisdom teeth than my friends that are saving a patient's life, treating their hydrocephalus by placing a shunt. And so what's interesting is, one, the muddy under economics of that, which I hope change. But 2, you're talking about a pretty big patient population. There's 300,000 open procedures a year, 80,000 are hydrocephalus. You can get it you or I could get it tomorrow. Johns Hopkins said, look, let's take our adult patients and let's at least see if the ultrasounds we're getting through these tiny burr holes that we're already making anyways to place a shunt correlate to the CT scans that they're already getting. Most of these patients will get 4 CT scans before we discharge them. If we could replace 1, it's meaningful. And so you see this often. Ultrasound is very user intensive. And so it took a few, if not 37, but they, on their way to 100, the way as it was explained to me is, they're all 37 patients were correlating. They could measure the midline, the ventricles to the millimeter. They could see blood. They can see the things that they were looking for. And a lot of times they could see the catheter landing in the ventricle. They could see the things that they were looking for in the CT on the ultrasound, 37 out of 37 times. So it was correlating. Not always. So, they're also teaching us that air is the enemy and some other things. But that's what this study was showing. Is that 1, it's safe. There was no adverse events. And, the pleasant side effect is that 37 out of 37 patients, we could correlate what we were seeing measurement-wise to the CT. And what you see is where ultrasound then goes, on that left is all too often I'm showing, or we're looking at this in a still image like right now, but it's always moving. And so in real life, that top left is NYU. You can see 2 sharp white lines on it. No, I'm sorry, below that. Yeah, below the sonosan. That's an educational. Right there, you can see there's 2 white lines in that trapezoid. That's our implant. So you're looking down from the top of the skin to the tissue through our implant. And then that red line is a blood vessel. That's a bypass.
Oh, right here. Yeah.
Yeah. So that STA you can see. Now, the beauty of ultrasound is that's really moving. So normally when I'm showing that, it's pulsing and moving, and you can get a lot of information from that bypass. That patient just had surgery to, restore neurovascularity to that part of their brain. Traditionally the only way to really measure that is a CT angio, which is, a CT while you've got percutaneous apparatus. It's not pleasant for a patient. So what NYU is showing us is, hey, these are correlating well. And so on top of that, we're seeing an increase in patient compliance and experience. So again, if a lot of the times, and I don't want to put a number to it, you can get the information you need and the patient experience is better. That's a game changer for us. And you can see these slides go on. Others then are looking at tumors. The real question right now in tumors are, how do they look? How do they attenuate differently by class? And that's an open question for any of your listeners out there. We're enjoying the collaborations we're doing in oncology right now, and the gate's not shut. So please come to us with your question.
And, something I just, as we kind of wrap up, I wanted to mention, we have so many different companies that come on, but, one thing that, one of the problems right now with ultrasound is that there's a lot of user variability between if somebody's been doing it for 20 years versus just starting. And so you have first of all, Joe DeVivo and Butterfly have an amazing product, and they've partnered with a good friend of mine, Josh DeFonza, who's the CEO and co-founder of Mandera, which is a medical robotics company. Right. And so, seeing how there's different different types of innovations happening across medtech, and then sort of how they can sort of start getting married to each other. So, for example, I have a good friend of mine who actually has hydrocephalus, and so rather than him having to go to a hospital, get a CT scan and everything, he can have a longevity implant in with some monitoring, and then if he needs to get checked, just go to like a local clinic where they have a Mandera system that very easily checks and is able to scan and pick things up. Which again, like when it comes to ultrasound and any kind of imaging, I feel like that's like one of the other perfect applications for like AI that's going to democratize treatment and diagnostics.
You nailed it. And if I could pull the thread on that. So
please.
These two things that are happening coinciding with, our trajectory is, one, AI came around right on time for us. How are we going to process all these, we have so much data. We're going to have to start buying, warehouse servers. But, in that is value, so we can take the usability out of it. Already with our partnerships with Clarius, there's abilities to auto threshold what you're seeing so that a physician or anybody untrained can put it on here and it'll tell you soft tissue, neuroanatomy, ventricles. And in the future, we think collectively we all can eliminate that user usability. With our patients, for example, unlike other parts of your body, if you've got a window, it's going to be here. It's not likely to move. And so rather than holding a transducer here and losing a hand, it's very easy for us to make a hat that has a transducer in it. And we've got IP around this, but you can register and the light turns green. You don't have to do anything. We could be on a boat in the middle of the Pacific and I put my hat on, it turns green. You can ask me what I'm doing. I can tell you, I just uploaded a video of my brain to my physician at Johns Hopkins. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but it takes 10 minutes. 10 seconds. I got to do it, every day. There's a future there, and we know we're not the only ones looking forward to it.
Well, and I think the other thing that's interesting is that when you, aside from I always feel like when you not only improve access, but then you improve data capture, right? So if you think about it, like for these purposes, like when it comes to neural functionality, you might get, like, if you're lucky, one scan a month, like traditionally, right? If a patient even has that time, okay. But what happens, like, if you improve that accessibility and the technology, and you're getting it like once a day, even, so like, I went to medical school and I have like all these textbooks, like it will change how we treat and diagnose so many different diseases, because once you have, like, if you go from, like, if you 100x the data, right, and the flow of data, and it becomes more real-time data, I mean, what kind of things do you discover, right, that are usually missed just because patient doesn't have access? And even if they have access, like, they have to stop their lives, they have to schedule things, like there's all these variables that we don't have control over.
You nailed it. I mean, what does the brain look like when we're active? To date, there are very few examples of a video of active brain while we're in a real setting. I mean, case in point, I went and got a physical 2 weeks ago. I was yelling at a legal team and my blood pressure dropped 30 between that and my physician actually coming into the room. I was astounded. I work out, I run. When they told me my blood pressure, that was literally 5 minutes prior. I was at a state of high agitation, and within, a couple of minutes though, I could calm down and say, hey, I'm just here with my physical. How often is that happening, across the country in hospitals when you're only taking that one snapshot? Is that an austere moment for that patient? Are they high stressed? Are we getting the real data? So you're hitting the nail on the head, and we're really excited about all of that.
And again, like I mean, the one of the problems with the situation you just described is that once that happens, you're getting like a snapshot in a random, which could be a random moment of time, right, where some variables influence things, and then what often happens, because not because clinicians mean for that, but just they're part of a larger system. So, you throw drugs at it, and there's side effects, and and now, like, the patient's going down this rabbit hole of side effects, and like there's just all these problems. So, like, I think I really believe the future of healthcare is going to be driven by what's done in the medtech medical device space. Honestly,
it's exciting. Yeah, I mean, we should get together sometime after your podcast and ideate. We live in one of the most exciting times to be involved in med tech. So, I would encourage all of your listeners that are in the space to stay here. We need you, and don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions. I certainly wasn't. Ask them in the right scenarios, but that's how we're going to solve these things, by working together.
100%. Well, Jesse, look, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm excited to, follow you along, hopefully have you back in a year or so for sort of an update. And for those who are listening again, whether you're an investor or clinician or even a patient, go to the website. That's Longevity, spelled LONGEVITI.com. If you enjoyed this episode and you feel like somebody can benefit from it, whether it's, again, investor, clinician, patient, forward this episode along. Be sure to subscribe and give us those 5 stars. I'm your host, Omar Khatib, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.